After last weekend's dialogue with the party leaders from around the world, we'll talk to an entrepreneur to find out how his business interests fit in with the goals of the Communist Party of China. And in Yemen, following the assassination of ex-President Saleh, which direction will this war-torn country now take, and what are the wider implications for the region? Welcome to The Point. Live from Beijing, I'm Li Xin. Remaining true to our original aspiration and keeping our mission firmly in mind, that was the theme of the 19th National Congress of the CPC, which was convened in September. Now, less than a week after the meeting, the newly elected CPC top leadership made a high-profile visit to the birthplace of the party in Shanghai, and also to a lake in Jiaxing in East China's Zhejiang province, where the first CPC National Congress wrapped up in December 1921. How can the party stay true to its original mission while adapting to the changing times, according to a businessman? And how can business, especially overseas businesses, strike a balance between commercial profits and keeping in line with the goals of the Communist Party of China? I'm pleased to be joined from Shanghai by Vincent Lo, chairman of the Shuiyong Group, a Hong Kong-based building materials and construction firm. He's a justice of the peace in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region and also a member of the 12th National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, the country's top political advisory body. Mr. Lo, thank you for joining us. Now, in 1921, delegates representing some 50 founding members of the CPC nationwide convened the first National Congress of the CPC in Shanghai, but later they had to move to a boat in the South Lake in Jiaxing, Zhejiang province. And now, when we're looking at the CPC, there are some over 89 million members after just under a century's time. How do you look at the growth of this party, both in scale and in influence?
It's absolutely a miracle that the transformation revival of China can happen in such a short time. The party was established a little less than 100 years ago, and since the reform and opening up 39 years ago, China has now become the second largest economy in the world, and people's livelihood, quality of living is improving by the day. I think that's absolutely incredible, how this can be achieved with a country the size of China, with 1.3 billion people.
Do you have some answers to that question, or have you thought about it?
Of course, it's not so simple and easy that somebody from outside can address this, but I guess I can give you my views that I think it's absolutely amazing that the party can adapt itself to the changing times. And I think Mr. Deng Xiaoping, he really has helped transform the party. And I think his famous line is the white cat or black cat, as long as it can catch the mice, it's going to be a good cat. And I think that's how I think China has adapted to the changing environment and improved the economy, and then now it's on the way to becoming a very important member of the international community.
Well, you talk about the ability of the CPC to adapt to changing times. It's interesting because during the visit to the lake, the South Lake in Zhejiang province, General Secretary of the CPC, Xi Jinping, talked about a red boat spirit. That boat is where the founding members of the CPC had to relocate to after their meeting site in Shanghai became insecure. So when he talked about this red boat spirit, he basically talked about creativity, hard work and devotion. So as a businessman who developed Xintiandi, the area surrounding the birthplace of the CPC, how do you understand the so-called red boat spirit?
I think it's in a way very similar to the entrepreneurial spirit that the founder believe in their own vision and have conviction in their beliefs. And in pursuing whatever is necessary to achieving their end results. And I think the Red Boat spirit is basically doing that. They were under threat when they were having their first Congress meeting, and so they have to relocate themselves to a boat to continue with their meeting. I think that shows the determination and dedication of the members at that time.
Right, and you were one of the first overseas developers to come onto the Chinese mainland and do business here, and you have done many projects, but you always kept a balance between preserving the historic sites and maximizing commercial profits. Why was it important for you, and do you think your efforts are paying off?
Well, I think it's very important that for any country or cities to try and preserve their history and traditions. Whenever I go to a new place, I always want to go and see the old buildings in that city, because I think it can tell you a lot about the history and traditions of the place. And then if these old houses or old places can be maintained well, then it shows that the economy is also doing well. And I think for the first Congress Hall, it's the birthplace of the Communist Party. It's also a very important place for the whole of China, that this place was the start of the reform and transformation for China. And for me to be able to participate in the development around the first Congress Hall, I feel it's really my honor and privilege. And when I first started to think about how I can preserve the Stonegate housing, this recruitment in that area, because at that time the Planning Bureau requires that we maintain the ambience of the first Congress Hall and its neighborhood. And so I have to try and figure out exactly what I can do with the Stonegate housing. Those are very old buildings, which are actually not suitable for modern day use, both for living or working. And if I have to preserve them, I have to come up with a concept of how I can make better use of them. If I just preserve the old houses, then they would become like a museum. And people would just go and visit one time, maybe take a picture, and then they won't come back. So I was thinking, could I try and bring some life into those old houses so that it can become a place that will attract people to go and visit on a daily basis, make it become part of their daily life. And that's the idea I have, because I've visited places like Soho, Covent Garden in London, and I feel that, you know, it's important that we try and have that in Shanghai, especially around the first Congress Hall. Because in the old days, since the opening up of China, all these old houses have been torn down in the name of development. And I think it's important, and at that time I was required to do that, and it forced me to really come up with some innovative ideas of how to preserve them and give them life. And I'm so happy and glad that now it's become a very popular place in Shanghai, and visitors coming to Shanghai have all been introduced to the place. And now with the first Congress Hall being popular again, I think it's going to help both my business and also I think the President going to the first Congress Hall. I think he's trying to remind his own party members that that is what they have wanted to do, is to improve the life of the Chinese people, and also for the general public, for the people of China, especially the younger generation, to understand that this is where it all started.
Right. Well, in a broader picture, in recent years, President Xi Jinping has been reiterating that in order to rejuvenate the Chinese nation, we must remain confident of our culture, of our political system, of our political theory, and our development path. Do you have a sense that, you know, this is what you have been doing, basically, and you know, you are seeing more of that sense of confidence in the Chinese government as well?
Oh, definitely, most definitely. With all the steps that have been taken in the past 20, 30 years, you can see that the leadership has always been able to have the vision, to have the foresight, to know what is required in order to continue to improve the economy and improve the livelihood of the people. I was brought up in Western education, but my father, in my earlier days, constantly talked to us about the Chinese tradition and culture, and I really appreciate, we are a country of 5,000 years of civilization, and there's a lot of good things in our culture, and I think we must try and preserve it.
What's your next big project?
I also actually have another project in Shanghai called the Knowledge and Innovation Community. It's actually modeled after Silicon Valley, because I think that is important for our country to develop and grow from here, right? We need to have our own innovation, we need to have our own brands, and to create a place like the Knowledge and Innovation Community, we are modeling after Silicon Valley so that the people with new ideas, with innovations, with new creations, they can find the financial support for them to grow their business, to commercialize their ideas, and I think that will give the economy a lot of boost, and I think that's very important for China at this stage.
Thank you very much, Vincent Lo, Chairman of the Zhejiang Group. And here is my first point, my commentary. The Communist Party of China was founded in a very hostile environment, and China was in chaos. People were debating on the right path forward, and the small group of some 50 founding members of the CPC believed they had the right answer, that is communism. And history is proving them right. In just under a century, the number of members has grown to be 89 million, making the CPC the biggest party in the world. China also transformed from a semi-colonized feudal country to the world's second largest economy, with growing influence on the world stage. But the spirit of creativity, hard work and devotion should not be tarnished, just as the historic buildings need to be well kept. The CPC is reminding its members nationwide of the importance to continue to be creative, hardworking and devoted. If well preserved and implemented, the party believes what motivated party members 96 years ago could lead China to rejuvenate itself in the near future. You're watching The Point. I'll be back right after this. The death of Yemen's former President Ali Abdullah Saleh in the capital Sanaa on Monday at the hands of the Shia-backed militant group Houthi has plunged the war-torn country into further disarray. The Houthis had formed a shaky alliance with the longtime leader and his General People's Congress, or GPC, against the government of President Abdurrabbu Mansur Hadi in 2014. But 2 days before Saleh was killed, he publicly stated his willingness to engage in talks with Saudi Arabia, which has been leading a military coalition against the Houthis since March 2015. So what will now happen to Yemen, and more particularly to Yemen's capital Sanaa, with its population of more than 2 million? And will Saleh's death prolong the country's current war and humanitarian crisis? Joining me are Nasser Arabieh, a Yemeni journalist and filmmaker based in Sanaa, and in Brussels, Joost Hilterman, Program Director from the Middle East and North Africa for the International Crisis Group. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Mr. Arabieh, now Saleh's supporters had for months been fighting alongside the Houthis in a war against Yemen's current president, Hadi. But on December the 2nd, Saleh offered to turn a new page with the Saudi-led coalition. Days later, Saleh was killed. What do you think led him to switch camps in this manner?
Thank you very much. I think what was behind this switching sides from Saleh was the the desire of the Saudi-led coalition to break the Houthi-Saleh alliance. That was a very important thing for the Saudi-led coalition from the very beginning to break, because they knew that without breaking this Houthi-Saleh alliance, it would be very difficult for them to make any progress. And this is what happened. So they tried to convince Saleh's son, maybe in the United Arab Emirates, to convince his father. And this is exactly what happened, and what made Saleh even made his call for his supporters in a very sudden way, that the supporters of Saleh let him down because they did not believe it, and it was a very surprise thing for him. Although in last August his supporters wanted him to do something like this, because there was some kind of resentment and some kind of refusal because of the life, the economic life and economic hardships in the country. But Saleh in last August he let down his supporters. He did not do what his supporters wanted at the time.
Mr. Hilderman, what is your take on this question, and any response from you on Mr. Arabier's answer to my first question?
Well, I think Mr. Arabier has it right. This is what happened. I think there is one additional possibility, because the question is, when Mr. Saleh, having expressed his preference to work with the Saudi-led coalition, and having been encouraged probably by the Saudi-led coalition to turn against the Houthis, why didn't the Saudi-led coalition then come to his help when the Houthis pushed back and threatened to take over Sanaa, which in the end they did, and threatened to kill him, which in the end they did? What our understanding is that because Saleh had betrayed Saudi Arabia earlier, a few years ago, basically they dropped him. They encouraged him to turn against the Houthis, and then when he was with the back against the wall, they dropped him. And the reason for that, and if you look at Saudi Arabia's strategy in the region, if you look at what happened in Lebanon recently, then you see that they want to make the enemy very visible. And the enemy for them is Iran, be it playing its cards in Yemen or in Lebanon. So this may have happened. I cannot confirm it, but it looks like something like that.
Mr. Hilderman, what is your take on the future direction of the situation in that country? Where do you think Yemen will go after the killing of Saleh?
Well, you know, there is an opportunity for a peaceful way forward. There always is. And in this case, what it would take is for Saudi Arabia to sit down with the Houthis, as they have in the past, and work out an arrangement that is inclusive in Sanaa, in terms of governing the country, inclusive of the Houthis and other parties. And that would give them a fair share. Excluding them is not going to work. I'm afraid that the path that is being chosen is to step up violence in the country in an effort to defeat the Houthis. But the Houthis have just shown how strong they are militarily, and so to now assemble a ground coalition in Yemen, consisting of Saleh supporters who now have lost their leader, and other groups that have already shown that they are not able to fight, and hope to defeat the Houthis, it's just going to lead to a prolonged conflict. And of course we know who are the victims of this. It's the Yemeni people.
Of course. And
Yemen has been and will continue to be a humanitarian disaster, with famine on the horizon and a rapidly spreading cholera.
Mr. Arabier, are you worried about that prospect that Mr. Hilderman just painted?
Well, I have two things to say in this, where Yemen goes. Now, after death of Saleh, it's a big turning point, of course, and we are at the crossroads, yes. But we have two directions, or Yemen has two directions to go now, after the death of Saleh. The first direction is for Houthi to go alone now in power, either to fight or to negotiate. It's one leadership and one negotiator, and this would be okay. At least now they are without internal conflicting as they were. But the second direction that Yemen can go or might go is the direction of more wars and humanitarian situation getting worse and worse and worse. Now we are, of course, the worst in the world, but might be get worse and worse. And this, of course, this means no mini groups in the country. Having more wars means many groups in the country and having no control on them, and which means the region would be in a more dangerous situation than it was, because the only or the big winner now here of this situation is the Qaeda and ISIS, the terrorist groups, unfortunately. And this is very dangerous, not only to Yemen, but also to the region, to the United States in particular, and to the West, that play big role, unfortunately, in this conflict in Yemen. And I think they could do something to help it. They could do something. They can make advantage of having now one leadership in Sanaa to make a negotiation with them and to reach a peaceful solution. It will be easier than it was, because it's only one leadership now and one negotiator.
Mr. Hildeman, do you think it will be in the interest of Western countries to try to use this opportunity to push for more negotiations between the Saudi-led coalition and the Houthis?
Well, it certainly is in the interest, because it's in no one's interest that Yemen descend into further chaos and become an even greater humanitarian catastrophe than it already is. But, you know, these are Western countries that are at the same time selling weapons to Saudi Arabia, which Saudi Arabia and its allies are using to bomb Yemen. I think there has to be pressure exercised on the Saudi-led coalition to agree to talks with the Houthis, because this has been a big sticking point. I think I absolutely agree with my colleague in Sanaa, Mr. Al Arabiya, that the Houthis, it will be easy for them now to negotiate, because they no longer have this partner that they didn't really get along with in the first place to deal with. So now the negotiations will be very clear. Go ahead.
Do you think the Houthis would be willing to sit down and talk with the Saudis?
Well, they have in the past. It's not the issue. But in the more recent past, the Saudis insisted that they would talk to the Houthis only if they came to Riyadh. You know, that is difficult, because that is like giving up. There has to be some neutral ground. So I think what is very important is to work with the mediators that have been active, in particular Oman and Kuwait, to find a venue that is acceptable to both sides, where they can sit across the table and hammer out a deal that is an inclusive one.
Yeah, Mr. Arabi, I have two more minutes, but really try to limit. I really want to ask you this question: what about the role of Iran here? Will the death of Saleh influence anyway Iran's support to the Houthis?
I think Iran, the influence of Iran is limited to the media and political things from the beginning of this conflict in Yemen. But I think, and nobody can deny that what happened now was in the interest of Iran, because it was a big failure to Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates in particular, because they were seeking and they were looking for just for how to break the alliance between Houthi and Saleh. And when this alliance was broken, something even worse happened, that is the assassination of Saleh, which means now they are also shocked, and it seems that they don't have any plan. They don't have any. They don't know what to do next. And this is a big problem, because what they wanted from the breaking the alliance is just to make Houthi and Saleh fight each other. But what happened is that Saleh was killed in the first day, and this was a big shock for the Saudi-led coalition. So I think Iran is winning, as it was from the very beginning. It was always winning and making advantage of this conflict in Yemen, but without losing. Iran is not losing anything. Iran is always winning without losing, and this is the problem in the conflict of Yemen. That is, that is made
Mr.
by
Hilderman,
the Saudi-led coalition.
Mr. Hilderman, 20 seconds, your take on this question.
Well, I agree. I mean, Iran is gaining simply because of the mistakes of its enemies, not because it is actively pursuing a certain strategy. Iran is just saying thank you, thank you, thank you for all the mistakes you have made. And the more Saudi Arabia makes mistakes, the more panicked it becomes, and then it makes even more mistakes. And the Iranians are just pocketing it. It's very easy for them. That is unfortunately the reality.
We're going to keep a close watch on the situation. Many thanks to the two gentlemen, Nasser Arabieh, a Yemeni journalist and filmmaker from Sanaa, and in Brussels, Joost Hilderman, Program Director for the Middle East and North Africa for the International Crisis Group. And that is it for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. Download the application called CGTN Live to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Follow me on Twitter or Facebook using the handle The Point with Alex. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.